Welcome, everybody, to the Snap Podcast. My name is Tyler Kluver, and let's consider this a personal audio journal of mine. A lot of rambling, a lot of random stuff, anything relevant in my personal life that has to do with health, fitness, diet, business, being an entrepreneur, and simply trying to unlock the avenues of personal growth that help me find the most happy, fulfilling, and free life that I can live. I hope that you guys can take something away from the show and maybe find some entertainment in it as well. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get to it. Let's get to it. All right. It's been a while since I recorded this podcast. We are back for the Snap Podcast for the first time in 3 weeks. And the last time I recorded, we talked about deep work and we talked about what I learned over 100 episodes and we talked about something else. And I like that format. I like that format of recording 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 podcasts. Hell, if I've got a series I want to record, maybe I could get nuts and everything would align and I'd be able to record 5 or 6 podcasts in a week and then be able to schedule those out a month, 6 weeks in advance and just keep this as much of a passive and behind the scenes project on my end, the input end, as possible, while still maintaining an outward, consistent product, if that makes sense for you guys. Um, Want to take a second to just acknowledge you guys for continuing to come back and listen to this podcast. 250 to 300 of you guys on a weekly basis are tuning in, and I hope that you're finding plenty of enjoyment, learning, and value in what I'm putting out. I am a little bit inspired today, and I don't know if that inspiration is going to manifest itself into um, production into the product, should we say today? But I have specifically a client. His name is Mike. Been working with him one on one with nutrition and exercise for going on 3 years now. Sort of towards the beginning of the COVID times, and he started his own podcast on Cubs baseball, sort of a numbers based statistical shifted podcast, and has been doing it for a while now. He, if you're interested in going to listen to that or you're a Cubs fan, the name of the podcast is Cubs PS Plus. I don't even know what that means. I think there's some stat or something in baseball that's like OBS plus or something like that. So he's the Cubs PS Plus podcast. He reached out when he had the idea of like, hey, I think I want to start a podcast. It was something that he was doing sort of in between jobs. And I mean, I can't tell you guys the amount of times that I've had people reach out to me just because of what we've done with the Washed Up Walk-Ons, to ask, hey, we're starting a podcast. Do you have any suggestions? Or here's the questions I have relative to uh, what are the best practices? What would be your advice to starting a podcast? And sometimes it gets deeper than that into, hey, what are the specifics of what you think about this and how I should run this part of the show and all this stuff. And I give my advice. Rarely do I end up going to listen to the product, right? And it's not because I don't care. It's not because I shouldn't say that. Most of the time I don't care, right? Most of these podcasts or people that are reaching out are starting up shows that some of them have been for their company, some of them have been for topics or subjects, areas that I just don't have any interest in. Some of them are for very specific niche groups of people. So rarely do I go and listen to one of the products, but Mike had one of my former teammates, our former teammates on the show, Mark Wiseman, on one of his episodes. He's about 30 episodes deep. And 20 or so episodes in, he had Mark Wiseman on, who is a former Iowa running back, walk on, been on the walk on show, now is in the Cubs organization as a strength and conditioning coach. And somebody that I am interested to listen to, somebody that I would consider worth my time, right? No matter whose podcast he goes on, Mark is worth my time. And so I decided to flip on that episode last night as we were putting baby to bed, feeding baby the bottle. And great listening to Mark. Great to hear from Mark. Need to get him back on the show. But what I was more impressed with was what Mike was doing with the show. I was really, really thoroughly impressed with the production value that Mike has. He's a technical guy. He knows how to work with computers and software and all of that. But the flow it sounded like he's been doing it for years. It sounded like a professional show. He just started it up a couple months ago. And he only gets, maybe 50 or 100 listeners per show. He's trying to grow it, trying to make it into something. So the episode that he did with a guest, obviously guests are, for those that don't know, on the production value side of things, having a guest makes good content a whole lot easier. Conversation flows much, much easier. Grabbing the listener's attention when you have someone to talk to back and forth, as opposed to what I'm doing right now and just talking to you, monologuing on a subject is much, much easier. Retention, much, much easier. His show was good enough with Mark that I went to listen to another episode. In fact, 2 other episodes. And him talking by himself is what inspired me. And now I've been talking about it for 6 minutes on the show. And we're going to get to today's topic, which is RPE, in a second. Um, and so feeling a little bit inspired because he the way that he's professionalized his podcast so early on in the process is he very clearly has scripted out a lot of what he's going to say. Ugh. He probably doesn't yawn into the mic when he does it. I didn't hear any yawns, at least. And it sounded so good. Sounded so good the way he structured and outlined the stuff that he was talking about. Um, Good enough that I thought, man, the Snapped podcast might be able to use a little bit of that. I might be able to learn something from Mike, who's done 28 episodes of a Cubs podcast and has, you know, not even 1% of the downloads or recognition that our brand has had with the Washed Up Walk-Ons, but, maybe not even 10% of what I've done with this show, the Snap podcast. But there's something to learn there, right? Hell, maybe we even just turn this into I've already been talking for almost 10 minutes, and the RPE episode's gonna go for a while. So maybe we just turn this into something different here. Um, I've got plenty to talk about. I think the lesson here is that learning opportunity and mm, room for growth can be found anywhere if you're willing to look for it and you're willing to accept it. And that is something that I have probably not been as receptive to as I should be, especially as someone who is a creator. I would say generally that sits a little bit lower on my natural personality trait or who I am as a person. What does that mean? I think me, Tyler Kluver, I think to some extent all of us go through life thinking that what we do on a daily basis, our behavior, the way that we live our lives is correct. at least correct in our own individual pursuits. I don't know a lot. It would be very hard. I think it's just the nature of it. It would be very hard for us to walk around each day as humans and just continually make decisions that we're second guessing, right? It's like I don't, should I have woken up at 7:30 or 7:45? Ah, fuck, I don't know. Should I have made eggs or toast for breakfast? I don't know if that was the right decision, right? We generally do, and maybe we conflate that with the decisions that bring us the most joy, or at least um, sometimes are the easiest, right? What is the easiest decision in the moment? And this is where things get a little dicey. And the law of mediocrity, we'll call it. I don't think that's a real law. In fact, let's do a little search. Is there such thing? The law of mediocrity. Oh, oh, we might have found something. Hey, this is exactly what I wanted to see. Let's go. Breaking ground here. The mediocrity principle is the philosophical notion that if an item is drawn at random from one of several sets or categories, it's more likely to come from the most numerous category than from any one of the less numerous categories. Yes. Now that gets a little bit into the weeds, but what that can be extrapolated out to, or what I was trying to talk about there is with the law of mediocrity, is that when you decide to make these decisions in your life, right? This isn't really relevant either, but this is a small tangent. Most of us are going to, if we aren't actively trying to better ourselves, if we aren't actively trying to make decisions that are going to push us forward into areas of growth, then likely the decisions we make, throw 100 decisions in a day into a bucket, 70, 80, 90, 95 of those decisions are going to be ones that result in nothing special happening, right? Mediocrity. And so, in a way that is relevant, the, you know, the way that we should be is we should consider every decision we make, and maybe not in the moment because that gets a little tedious and overwhelming, but we should structure our lives in a way where decisions are made ahead of time, that are planned for and sought after, or seeking um, more than mediocrity. They're seeking greatness. They're seeking growth. And where I was going with that is me as an individual, I very much so think that even the decisions that I think I'm making are for growth, are for bettering myself. I almost never question myself. I think I'm right all the time. And even in post processing, I often go back and think, I'm making better decisions than most people. I'm doing the things I need to do to advance myself further. Self confidence is great. Believing in yourself is great. Not second guessing yourself is great. You can get a lot done. You can be productive, efficient. And if you're good with the results, which oftentimes I am, there's not a lot of feedback to tell you, hey, what you're doing is wrong. But could it be better? Could the Snap podcast be better? Could everything I do be better? And so I am not always in the position, or I'm not always allowing myself to open my mind to something like, hey, there's a client I have who we already have this client coach relationship, who started a podcast, even though I started a podcast 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. His is about Cubs baseball. His it only gets 1,000 total downloads. Ours have millions. Could I potentially learn something from him? And up until this point, up until last night, the answer was no. because I didn't even give it a chance. All of a sudden, I flip it on and I realize, wow, the way he scripts his episodes, even a little bit of the way he does his intro and brings himself into the show, it sounds good. It sounds good, and I think there's things that we could copy, implement, work on in this show to help add value to you guys, the listeners. I hope, and I think I've done a really, really good job this episode, and this is a small thing, but I hope that this episode has sounded pretty fluid. There hasn't been a lot of ums and ahs in this episode, and really trying to focus on and the right word would be consciously put in an effort to pause, be okay with the silence, especially because I know I'm going to edit out any super long silences on the back end of this and let my thoughts come to me so that I can sound a little bit more professional. And then not only that, but the thought process, the order of events of which I am speaking and opening the show, going through the middle of the show, building a story, building suspense or conflict or resolution, and then answering being a storyteller. Even though I'm not here to tell fictional stories or something, there's still an art to getting across a piece of content. And I feel like today's episode has been decent with that. I want to be better. And last night, listening to Mike's podcast made me want to be better. So hopefully I sound better. I use less ums and ahs. I sound a little bit more controlled and through line with my thinking, my subjects. You may even start to hear some more scripted parts. I'm thinking about, we talked about the episode being about RPE earlier, and then we turned it into sort of a ragtag episode where we talked about the mediocrity principle and opening yourself up to seeing growth. Even if you're doing all right, you can always do better. Next week's episode is not going to be about RPE because we're going to get into a time of the year where weekly episodes are going to be necessary because the CrossFit Open is here. I am extremely excited about the CrossFit Open, but it now means that each week's episode is going to be based on the previous week's performance and then the next week's workout or whatever, so speculation around those. And so the RPE episode is going to get pushed, but when we get back to that single topic, sort of more centered content after the Open, probably after quarterfinals, because they kind of run together, you might hear some more scripted, slightly more scripted. I still want to add in some ad lib stuff, some off the cuff stuff, because I think that makes it more real. But I think you may hear some more scripted things. I'm excited to play with that and see if I can't find the right balance. Because I certainly believe that this show does lack sometimes in, call it direction, clear, logical next steps of conversation. I just kind of babble sometimes. I'd like to tighten that up a little bit because we need to get better. We might be good, but we need to get better. So, RPE now pushed to a month from now, and probably 5-6 weeks from now. And you guys can now expect in the following weeks, we are going to be full on CrossFit podcast. So maybe that deters some of you, maybe it interests some of you. There's some really new cool things that are out this year that sort of always happens within the CrossFit world because they're always tweaking and changing things. But there is a new worldwide ranking system that is put out by CrossFit HQ, the actual brand of CrossFit. There's always been ways where you can kind of rank yourself or say that you're you finished in this placing, but there's never been an official, I am ranked this in the world. That is now changed. Tyler Kluver now has a ranking on the worldwide, in the worldwide system. So next week we'll talk about where I am ranked in the world at CrossFit, why that is, and where that ranking will probably move, um, according to what we're about to do in the next 6 weeks. That'll be an exciting conversation. Oh man, I made it almost without two yawns. And then we will preview because the open workouts come out on Thursdays. We will sort of preview what we think um, this open is going to be like for me, what the goals are heading in, and some of the other fun extracurricular storylines that we are sort of going to personally follow throughout this upcoming CrossFit season. But until then, appreciate you guys joining me. Look for ways in unsuspected areas to get better in your life. Be open to learning from those who maybe you haven't in the past. And know that even if you're good, you can always get better. We'll talk next week. See you then.